Today we are critiquing a commentary piece that defends the Boston Straight Pride Parade as this brilliant political troll, while also arguing that all sexuality-based pride events are basically unnecessary. So let's just dive right into the feedback and see how we can elevate this material.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, jumping right into it, I think the first thing to note is that blending absurdist satire with, earnest legal argumentation, it just creates this tonal whiplash that unintentionally undercuts the persuasive power of the factual evidence.
Oh, 100%.
We have this piece that establishes a deeply exaggerated comedic persona right off the bat. The narrator is claiming his parents forced him to join a biker gang just to, quote, act straight.
Right, yeah.
And he vividly describes getting banned from the Walmart banana aisle for public displays of affection, which is funny, right? But then it just drops this persona entirely to deliver straightforward legal analysis regarding state laws and Supreme Court decisions on workplace discrimination.
Yeah, the shift is incredibly jarring. It feels a bit like watching a stand-up comedian suddenly just go completely deadpan right in the middle of a set.
Oh, yeah.
And they pull down this massive white projector screen and start walking the audience through this hyper-earnest, deeply complex legal bar graph about employment law. You look around the comedy club wondering if you're supposed to be laughing or if you'd need to be taking notes.
Exactly. And that is the core weakness here. Because the shift is so abrupt, the audience is left completely disoriented. They are totally unsure if they're supposed to mentally shift gears to process serious political commentary. And that dilutes the impact of the well-researched rebuttals.
Right, because, when we read, our brains subconsciously adopt a specific interpretive framework. If the text signals satire, we process the incoming words by constantly looking for the irony.
It's kind of like putting a warning high-voltage sticker right in the middle of a Sunday comic strip.
That's a great way to put it.
Right? Because the reader is primed for a punchline, so they assume the warning itself is just another joke. And if they try to touch the wire, they end up getting shocked.
Yeah, exactly.
If you hand a reader raw, unironic data from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission without building a bridge first, their brain just misfires. They end up trying to find the joke in the EEOC statistics,
which completely strips the legal argument of its actual weight. So, the suggestion for improvement here is to create a deliberate, seamless bridge between the satirical character and the analytical commentator.
Okay, so how do they do that?
Well, the author really must either explicitly break the fourth wall to drop the act, or they need to weave the sarcasm directly into the delivery of the legal facts, just so the overall arching voice remains consistent.
I mean, I could play devil's advocate here and argue that, jarring the reader might be an intentional choice to wake them up. Sometimes writers use those abrupt transitions to snap the audience out of complacency.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that is a fair rhetorical tactic in certain artistic contexts, absolutely. But in this specific context, the legal data is meant to be the knockout punch to the opposition's argument about oppression.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, if the reader is off balance and still looking for the punchline, they miss the factual punch entirely. You really never want your reader questioning whether your hard facts are actually just part of the comedy routine.
That makes a lot of sense. And that brings up a really fascinating distinction in how you execute that bridge you mentioned. Like you have the Stephen Colbert method, right? Where the writer never drops the character.
Right, exactly.
The serious legal data is forced to filter through that absurd persona. But then you have what I like to call the Deadpool method, where the narrator just pauses, looks directly at the camera, and explicitly acknowledges stepping out of the...
Yeah. And we can look at concrete examples of both of those approaches. So instead of jarringly stating, according to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the writer could maintain the satiric lens by saying something like, even the EEOC agrees my so-called straight oppression is over, since they enforce Title VII.
Nice.
That is the Colbert approach. But alternatively, if the author prefers the Deadpool approach, they could use a clear transitional phrase where the narrator actively acknowledges stepping out of the joke. They could say something like, jokes aside, let's dismantle this with the actual law.
Yeah, that completely fixes the whiplash. And it's interesting because when a writer doesn't know what tone to use, it usually means they don't really know what their core argument is either.
Oh, for sure.
We see the tone split into two different directions, and when we look at the actual foundation of the message, the exact same split happens. It's like the tonal inconsistency is really just a symptom of a deeper contradiction in the piece.
That is absolutely right. And that leads to our next point. The dual framing of the straight pride parade as a meaningless, obvious troll, and simultaneously as a valid, necessary exercise in equality, while it models the piece's central thesis.
It really does.
The script repeatedly insists the event is obviously a brilliant troll, designed just to trigger people and mock identity politics. The author points to the organizers, Super Happy Fun America, and their mascot, the actor Brad Pitt, to prove that liberals are just missing the joke.
But then, in the very same section, the author spends an equal amount of time arguing earnestly that straight people actually deserve recognition.
Exactly.
They complain that the LGBT community has a monopoly on celebrating sexuality, and they heavily quote attendees who seem to be taking the parade very seriously. Like, they quote this 71-year-old man from New Jersey who drove 5 hours to attend, who said, "They've got gay everything, every place, we're people too."
Yeah, and that right there is the fundamental weakness. Relying heavily on the "it's just a joke" defense weakens the philosophical argument being made about equality and double standards.
Right.
The author is trying to have it both ways here. They want the invulnerability of the court jester who, can't be criticized because they're just being funny, but they also want the intellectual authority of the philosopher who is pointing out a deep societal hypocrisy.
I do wonder if the contradiction is intentional, though. Like, the author's frustration seems to stem from a feeling that the rules of cultural engagement are just inherently contradictory right now.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Right? So maybe they're fighting fire with fire, using a contradictory argument to highlight a contradictory culture.
Well, if that is the underlying intent, the writer really has to guide the reader through that maze overtly. It's sort of the difference between accidentally dropping a glass on the floor and intentionally throwing a glass against the wall to prove a point about physics.
Ah, right.
You have to let the audience know the glass breaking was part of your plan. Otherwise, the reader just assumes the contradiction is a flaw in your reasoning rather than a deliberate rhetorical device.
So how do we fix that foundational crack then? What's the move?
The suggestion is to commit fully to one primary analytical framing or explicitly connect the two concepts by arguing that the troll is effective specifically because it accidentally exposes a legitimate logical double standard.
So they have to pick a lane.
Yeah, you have to choose your lane or pave a very clear road between the two.
Let's look at some concrete examples of how to actually apply that. If the author decides to lean completely into the troll angle, they need to reduce those earnest complaints about straight people needing recognition.
Yep, cut those out.
Instead, heavily emphasize how the organizers hijacked liberal rhetoric, like adding an S to LGBT and claiming to be an oppressed majority. Show how the parade was built purely to mirror and mock their opponents.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if they lean into the philosophical equality angle, they need to explicitly state that while the Brad Pitt mascot is obviously a joke, the New Jersey attendee saying, "we're people too," highlights a genuine cultural frustration that the parade tapped into.
Right, you just call it out directly.
Yeah, by explicitly stating, yes, this started as a joke, but look at the real cultural nerve it hit. You completely eliminate the contradiction. The pie in the face becomes a mechanism for revealing the structural cracks in the wall.
I love that. And once that core thesis is locked in, once the author decides whether this is pure satire or philosophical critique, the next logical step in structuring a robust commentary piece is stress testing that thesis against opposing views.
Absolutely.
And that transition brings us directly to the segment addressing the counter-arguments raised by the opposing YouTuber Tyler Oakley.
Right. And the topic sentence here is that engaging rigorously with the strongest, most nuanced versions of opposing arguments, rather than quickly dismissing them, will significantly elevate the material's intellectual authority and persuasive power.
And they don't really do that here, do they?
No, they don't. In this section, the opposition argues that straight pride is unnecessary because straight people don't experience systemic or cultural hurdles.
Right.
The opponent mentions the military ban on trans individuals, the difficulties queer couples face in adopting children, and the cultural reality that many queer people feel it is unsafe to hold hands or kiss a partner in public.
Yeah, and the weakness here is how the source material addresses those specific points. The author relies on those quick, dismissive comparisons we mentioned earlier.
Yep, the quick jab.
They likened a transgender military ban to the fact that people with autism are also barred from service. Then, regarding the fear of public kissing, the author jokes about getting banned from the Walmart banana aisle.
Right.
And after those really quick dismissals, they pivot entirely to legal protections, citing the 22 states with anti-discrimination laws, and conclude that the opposition's victim narrative is, quote, complete BS.
And that pivot completely ignores the opposition's core point, which is really about the cultural feeling of safety versus strict legal reality. The opponent is arguing about the anxiety of walking down the street, and the author is arguing about reading state legislation.
They're having two different conversations.
Exactly. By quickly dismissing the opponent's point about public safety with a joke about a banana aisle, the author completely avoids engaging with the actual weight of the argument.
It is a bit like testing a submarine. Like, you don't test the hull in a shallow swimming pool where the pressure is low, you know?
Right.
You take it down into the Mariana Trench, because if it survives those crushing depths, you know you've built something undeniably strong. By using the banana aisle joke, the author is basically testing their thesis in the kiddie pool.
That is a perfect analogy. And the psychological component of this evasion is critical. When a writer dismisses an opponent's deeply held cultural reality, they instantly alienate any reader who might be on the fence.
Yeah, the undecideds are gone.
Right. Readers who already agree with the author, they'll laugh at the joke, but the undecided reader immediately closes their mind. They sense that the author doesn't actually understand the nuance of the debate.
So how do we get that undecided reader to lower their defenses? Because that's the whole goal of writing commentary like this.
The suggestion here is to utilize the steel manning technique. The author must acknowledge the valid cultural aspects of the opponent's argument before methodically dismantling why those cultural realities do not justify the specific phenomenon being debated.
Which, in this case, is corporate-sponsored pride parades.
Exactly.
I can see a risk there. Does steel manning give the opposition maybe too much ground? Like, if you concede that their cultural anxiety is real, aren't you accidentally validating their need for the very parade you're arguing against?
That is the tightrope walk of steel manning, for sure. If you concede too much without a sharp pivot, you actually do end up making their argument for them.
Right, which defeats the purpose.
Exactly. But that is exactly why drawing a hard boundary between cultural discomfort and systemic oppression is so vital here. You have to sever the link between the very real cultural problem and the specific phenomenon you're critiquing.
Wow, that requires an incredibly precise rhetorical maneuver. Let's provide a concrete example of how the writer could actually structure that on the page.
Okay, so the writer could start by acknowledging that cultural stigma absolutely still exists. They could write something like, sure, some people might still give you a dirty look for holding hands in public, and that's a genuine cultural struggle.
Okay, I like that. By saying that, the undecided reader thinks, okay, this author is reasonable. They see the nuance.
The drawbridge comes down.
Exactly. The drawbridge is down, and once it's down, you march your actual thesis right into the castle. You pivot sharply back to the core argument, saying something like, however, cultural side-eyes do not equate to systemic legal oppression. With the Supreme Court and EOCC enforcing workplace protections, month-long corporate-sponsored parades are an outdated response to a legal problem that has largely been solved.
That clarifies the mechanics beautifully. So you concede the cultural truth to win the logical war. You argue that cultural discomfort requires interpersonal dialogue, whereas parades and protests are tools for fighting systemic legal oppression.
Exactly.
And because legal equality has largely been achieved, the parade is no longer a protest. It is just a party.
Right. And it transforms the piece from a fleeting reactionary internet rant into a work of genuinely compelling cultural commentary. And surprisingly, it actually makes the humor land much better later on.
Really? How so?
Well, when you prove you can handle the heavy, serious aspects of the debate with intellectual honesty, your sarcastic jabs feel earned rather than evasive.
That makes total sense. You've proven you're not just dodging the hard stuff.
Exactly.
Well, to recap, this critique focused on maximizing the impact of the commentary through three structural alignments. First, harmonizing the satirical voice with the serious legal evidence so the reader doesn't suffer from tonal whiplash.
Right.
Second, clearly defining the core thesis by choosing whether to lean fully into defending a clever troll or explicitly connecting that troll to a genuine argument for ideological equality.
Yep.
And finally, steel manning the opposition's points about cultural safety. So acknowledging lived realities before methodically proving why those realities don't justify the necessity of modern pride parade. We really invite the listener to apply these actionable strategies and submit their revised work for another critique in the future.
Absolutely. The raw material here is incredibly strong. And with that final layer of architectural rigor, these arguments will land with much, much greater force.
Because ultimately, you want to make sure that when you do pull down that white projector screen, the audience knows exactly why you did it, and they are completely captivated by what you have to show.